At 4 a.m., I was about to leave for the airport when my late wife's lawyer pounded on my door. His face was white. "Don't go to work today. Trust me." I asked why. He pointed at my suitcase and said, "Don't take that suitcase to the airport. Someone is waiting for you to carry something out of this city." I froze. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. The man on the other end claimed to be police, and one question made my face go pale. "Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means everything. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country, but I want to know who is in this room with me." A quick note: this story contains fictional elements woven in for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental, but the message it carries is one worth keeping. The clock on the microwave read 4:07 when the doorbell rang. I was standing in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy blazer, when the sound cut through the stillness of the house like something breaking. Not a polite press of the button. A series of rapid, urgent rings, one after another, the kind that does not wait for an answer. I set down my coffee mug on the entryway table. The coffee was still hot. I had made it 12 minutes ago, right after I finished loading the last folder into my carry-on, a dark navy roller bag with a scuff mark on the bottom right corner that I had been meaning to repair for 2 years. My flight to Washington, D.C., American Airlines 1147 departed O'Hare at 6:15. I had been early as always. Raymond Oakes did not miss flights. I opened the door. The man standing on my porch was drenched in the kind of cold October fog that settles over Naperville before sunrise, the kind that soaks through wool and collar and skin. He was in his early 60s, a few years older than me, with silver hair flattened against his forehead and a dark overcoat that had clearly been thrown on without thought. His leather briefcase hung from one hand, and his other hand was already reaching past me toward the inside of the house. I had never seen this man before in my life. "Raymond Oakes," he said. Not a question. His voice was the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was now simply executing it. I stepped back instinctively, one hand moving to the edge of the door. "Who are you?" "Gerald Finch." He walked past me into the entryway without waiting for an invitation. His wet shoes leaving dark prints on the hardwood floor Margaret had refinished the summer before she got sick. He set his briefcase on the entryway table right next to my coffee. "I am an attorney. I was your wife's attorney, and you need to close that door right now." My hand tightened on the doorframe. The fog outside was thick enough to swallow the streetlights whole, and Elmwood Drive was completely still. Not a single car, not a single porch light, just the cold and the dark and this man in my entryway who had just told me he was Margaret's attorney. I closed the door. "Margaret never mentioned you," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Gerald was already opening his briefcase on the table, his movements precise and unhurried, the movements of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms where panic was a liability. "She was not supposed to," he said. That was the arrangement. He pulled out a manila envelope thick with photographs and laid it flat between us. "Before I explain anything else, I need you to look at these." I looked. 11 photographs, printed on standard copy paper, slightly grainy the way surveillance images always are when the lighting is poor. The timestamp in the corner of each image read Sunday, October 6, 2024, between 11:14 and 11:18 at night. The location, based on the concrete pillars and the low ceiling, was a parking garage. Underground level by the look of it, and standing in the center of every single photograph under the pale yellow glow of a sodium lamp was my son-in-law, Preston Caulfield. He was wearing the navy blazer he had worn to Vivian's birthday dinner 3 weeks ago. I recognized it by the small silver pin on the left lapel, the one Vivian had given him for their 2nd anniversary. He was handing something to another man, someone whose face was entirely obscured by a low-pulled baseball cap. 2 hard drives, black and rectangular, exchanging hands in the space of 4 minutes and 17 seconds. My stomach dropped so fast I had to press my fingertips into the edge of the table to steady myself. "That is Navy Pier," I said. My voice had gone thin. "That is the underground parking structure at Navy Pier. Level B3, Gerald confirmed. Last Sunday night. The man receiving the drives has been identified by my investigator as Fletcher Vane, a data broker with known ties to Nexogen Corporation, a biotech firm based in Boston." He paused. "You know that name?" I knew that name. My jaw tightened. "How long have you had these?" "Since Monday morning." He looked at me directly for the first time. His eyes were dark gray and extraordinarily still, the eyes of someone who had learned a long time ago how to hold difficult things without flinching. I came the moment I confirmed what they meant. I pushed back from the table. My legs felt wrong, like the floor had shifted slightly beneath me without making a sound. I walked to the kitchen window and stood there with my back to him, staring out at the fog pressing against the glass. 6 years. Preston and Vivian had been married for 6 years. I had sat across from that man at Thanksgiving. I had shaken his hand at the wedding. I had believed completely and without question that he loved my daughter. "What does this have to do with my flight?" I asked. I could hear how tight my own voice had become, how carefully I was holding it together. Gerald's answer came without hesitation. "Do not get on that plane, Raymond. The carry-on sitting in your entryway right now does not contain your conference materials." He let the words settle before he continued. "It contains evidence designed to convict you of stealing classified research data worth $847 million. Preston planted a transmission device in the lining of your bag. The moment you walk through the security scanner at Terminal 3, that device will automatically send 2.3 terabytes of encrypted research files to Nexogen Corporation's servers. Federal agents are already waiting at Gate B12. A reporter from WGN News was tipped off last night. By 6:30 this morning, your name and face would be on every screen in this city." The fog outside had not moved. The street was still empty. My coffee was getting cold on the entryway table. I turned around slowly. My hands, I noticed, had begun to shake. "He has been planning this for years," I said. It was not a question. The precision of it, the flight, the device, the agents, the reporter. It was not something a person built in a week or a month. This was architecture. This was something someone had drawn up and revised and perfected over a very long time. Gerald reached into his briefcase a second time and produced a smaller envelope, pale yellow, sealed with red wax. The wax was unbroken. The name written on the front in handwriting I would have recognized in complete darkness, in the middle of any dream, in any room on earth, was mine. "Raymond, only when it is time." My throat closed. I knew that handwriting. I had watched those letters form 10,000 times on grocery lists and birthday cards and the yellow sticky notes she used to press into my coat pocket on cold mornings. On the last letter she ever wrote me, folded on the nightstand in the hospital room, where I held her hand until she stopped breathing. "Margaret." Gerald's voice came from somewhere far away. "She gave that to me back in 2004, when she first understood the threat was real. She told me to deliver it only if someone came looking for the research." He paused. "Someone has." The envelope felt lighter than I expected. I do not know what I had imagined, 20 years of waiting, sealed into paper and wax, but I had expected weight. Instead, it sat in my palm like an ordinary thing, like a birthday card or a utility bill, and that ordinariness made something in my chest pull tight in a way I could not immediately name. I set it down on the kitchen table, not because I did not want to open it, because I was not ready and I needed 30 more seconds to be a person who could do this without his hands shaking worse than they already were. "Walk me through it," I said to Gerald. "The device, how does it work?" Gerald pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, placing his briefcase flat on his knees. Up close in the kitchen light, I could see how tired he was. The lines around his eyes were deep, and there was a tightness at the corners of his mouth that told me he had not slept. He had driven here in the fog at 4 in the morning, and whatever he had been carrying toward this moment, he had been carrying it for a long time. "Preston had access to your bag," Gerald said. "Based on what my investigator found, the most likely opportunity was 3 weeks ago, the evening you left your carry-on in the front hallway when you came to dinner at their place. Vivian mentioned you forgot your reading glasses in the car and went back for them. That gave him roughly 4 minutes alone with the bag. 4 minutes. The same amount of time the photographs showed him standing in that parking garage with Fletcher Vane." My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my temples. "The device itself," Gerald continued, "is a micro-transmission unit about the size of a thick coin sewn into the interior lining near the bottom of the bag. It runs on a compressed battery with a 6-hour charge. It does not activate on its own. It activates in response to the specific electromagnetic frequency emitted by the security scanners at airport checkpoints." He paused to let that settle. "The moment you carried that bag through the scanner at Terminal 3, it would have automatically broadcast 2.3 terabytes of encrypted research files to a receiving server registered to a shell company connected to Nexogen Corporation in Boston." I pressed my fingers flat against the kitchen table. The wood was cool and solid and real, and I needed something real right now. 2.3 terabytes, I said. That is the entire Oaks Initiative archive. Every file, every sample record, every result. Gerald's voice did not change in pitch or pace. He delivered terrible information, the way surgeons deliver diagnoses, with the steadiness of someone who understands that falling apart helps no one. Federal agents from the Chicago field office have been positioned at Gate B12 since midnight. They received an anonymous tip last Sunday evening, 48 hours after the Navy Pier exchange, accompanied by what appeared to be documentary evidence of your intent to transfer classified biological research data to a foreign-affiliated corporation. The word anonymous landed in my stomach like a stone. "Preston filed the tip himself," I said. "Through 3 intermediary contacts, yes. The paper trail is designed to be untraceable at first look." Gerald reached into his briefcase and withdrew a second document, a single sheet, and slid it across the table. He also filed this with the Cook County Circuit Court 4 days ago. I picked it up. The letterhead was from a law firm I did not recognize. The language was formal and precise, the kind of language that takes years to learn how to weaponize. It described Raymond Oaks, 60 years of age, retired research scientist, as exhibiting, and I read this 3 times before I believed it. Quote, "significant cognitive decline, disorientation, and an escalating pattern of erratic behavior consistent with early-stage dementia," end quote. It requested a court-ordered psychological evaluation, and pending the outcome, the appointment of a legal guardian to manage his affairs and assets. My hands stopped shaking. They went completely still instead, which was somehow worse. "He built a second trap," I said. My voice came out very quiet. "In case I missed the flight. If you had somehow been alerted to the device and avoided the airport, this filing would have given him a legal mechanism to have you declared incompetent. With guardianship, he would have had full access to your financial accounts, your property, and any research materials still in your possession." Gerald folded his hands on top of his briefcase. "He is thorough, Raymond. I want you to understand that before we go any further. This is not improvisation. He has been building this for years." A sound escaped my throat that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Something in between, something I had no name for. I pushed back from the table and stood up, walking to the window again, because I needed to move, because staying still felt like drowning. Outside, Naperville was still dark. Elmwood Drive, the street where Vivian had learned to ride a bicycle, where Margaret had planted roses along the front walk every spring, where I had lived for 32 years, Believing myself to be a man with a quiet and predictable life sat wrapped in fog and silence. He was in our home, I said, at our dinner table. He held Vivian's hand when she cried at her mother's memorial last year. My throat tightened until the words came out rough and broken at the edges. He sat there and looked me in the eye, and I never once. I stopped, pressed my fist against the windowsill. Gerald did not rush me. He did not offer comfort. He simply waited, and in that waiting, there was a kind of respect that I found strangely easier to bear than sympathy would have been. "There is a reporter," Gerald said after a moment. "Blake Fontaine, WGN News, 23 years on air, known for breaking federal criminal cases. He received an anonymous press tip Sunday night and was told to position himself outside Terminal 3 at 5:30 this morning for, quote, a career-defining arrest. He does not know the details. He only knows that a scientist connected to stolen government research will be taken into custody. Blake Fontaine." I did not know the name, but I knew the type. I had watched enough evening news to understand what it meant when a camera crew was already in position before the handcuffs came out. "So if I walk through that scanner," I said slowly, turning back from the window, "I am arrested on federal charges with cameras rolling. And if I somehow avoid the scanner and stay home, Preston files for guardianship and has me declared incompetent within the week." "That is correct." The clock on the microwave now read 4:22. I had a flight in less than 2 hours. My carry-on was sitting 14 feet away in the entryway, and somewhere in its lining, sewn in by the hands of a man who had eaten at my table for 6 years, was a device designed to end my life. I looked at the pale yellow envelope on the kitchen table. "She knew," I said. It was not a question. Gerald looked at the envelope too. When he looked back at me, something in his expression shifted just slightly, a hairline crack in the composure. "Open it," he said. "Then we will talk about what comes next." The wax seal broke with a sound so small I almost did not hear it. I do not know how long I stood at the kitchen table before I finally reached for the envelope. Long enough that Gerald had stopped watching me and turned his attention to the window, instead giving me the privacy of his profile rather than his eyes. Long enough that the fog outside had shifted slightly, the first gray suggestion of pre-dawn beginning to thin the darkness at the edges of the sky. The paper inside was cream-colored thick, the kind Margaret had always preferred for letters she considered important. She had a specific opinion about paper weight, one of those small, precise preferences that had always made me smile. 3 sheets, folded in thirds, covered front and back in her handwriting. The ink was dark blue. The date at the top read November 14th, 2004, 4 months before she died. My knees went soft beneath me. I pulled out the kitchen chair and sat down heavily, both hands flat on the table on either side of the letter, not yet touching the words themselves. I had not heard her voice in 20 years. Not really, not in any way that felt like her, and now here she was, in 3 sheets of cream paper, speaking from a November morning, 2 decades gone, and my chest hurt, in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the particular agony of being loved by someone you can no longer reach. I started reading. She opened without preamble, the way she always wrote, no greeting, no softening, just the thing itself. "Raymond, if Gerald has brought you this letter, then what I feared has moved from possibility into fact. Someone is coming for the research. I need you to listen to everything I am about to tell you, and I need you to believe it, even though I know how you think, and I know your first instinct will be to find a rational explanation that does not require trusting information you cannot independently verify. Fight that instinct, please." I closed my eyes for a moment. 20 years, and she still knew exactly how my mind worked. In September of 2002, I attended the annual Biomedical Research Symposium at the Marriott on Michigan Avenue. You were in Seattle that week for the Northwestern Conference. A young man introduced himself to me at the reception, on the second evening. His name was Preston Caulfield. He could not have been more than 16, dressed far too well for his age, and he knew things no teenager should have known. He knew your name. He knew the name of the project. He knew that Vivian had been sick in 2000 and that she had recovered in ways the hospital records could not fully explain. My breath left my body in one long, unsteady exhale. I kept reading. I did not let him know that I understood the significance of what he was telling me. I smiled and said very little and shook his hand at the end of the evening. Then I spent the next 2 years finding out exactly who he was. I found out that his doctoral fellowship at Johns Hopkins was funded through a private research endowment with no public record of its donors. I found out that the endowment was connected through 4 layers of corporate structure to a biotech firm in Boston called Nexogen Corporation. I found out that Preston Caulfield did not stumble into our orbit by accident. He was directed toward us. He was built for this specific purpose, Raymond, and that purpose is our daughter. My hand came up and pressed hard against my mouth, not to stop words. There were no words, just the pressure of it, the physical need to hold something in. Gerald from across the kitchen said nothing. He had heard the change in my breathing. He did not move. I have not told you any of this because I did not yet have enough to take to anyone who could act on it. What I have is inference and pattern, not proof. By the time I have proof, I suspect I will no longer be well enough to fight. So I am leaving what I know to Gerald, and I am trusting Gerald to know when the moment has come. There is one more thing, and this is the most important part of this letter. I paused on that line, took a breath, kept reading. The data in the Shawnee archive is not what anyone searching for it believes it to be. 3 years ago, I asked Elaine Corby for help. I told her everything. Elaine redesigned the archive's authentication system so that any attempt to copy the files without your specific decryption key will return a complete and convincing set of fabricated data. The copy will look real for approximately 72 hours before the internal verification protocols collapse and the forgery becomes apparent. Anyone who walks away with what they think is the archive will have nothing of value. Only you can unlock what is real. I set the letter down on the table. My hands were shaking again badly this time, badly enough that the paper trembled visibly between my fingers before I laid it flat. The kitchen felt very bright suddenly. The overhead light too sharp, the edges of everything too defined the way the world looks sometimes when the mind is trying to process something too large for the moment. Margaret had done this. Sick, exhausted in the middle of chemotherapy that was taking more from her each week than it was giving back, she had reached out to Elaine. Corby engineered a protection system for data she had never been supposed to know about, sealed the evidence in an envelope, handed it to a lawyer she had hired without telling me, and trusted that the chain of custody she had built would hold for however many years it needed to hold, all without saying a single word to me. She did not tell me, I said. My voice cracked on the last word, split cleanly down the middle. She was dying, and she was doing all of this, and she did not tell me. Gerald turned from the window. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all morning. She said you would not have let her carry it alone if you had known. She said you would have tried to fix it yourself, and that the fixing would have made it worse. He paused. She said the only way to protect you both was to let you believe you were protecting her. The sob came up without warning. Not a quiet thing. It tore out of my chest like something that had been locked in a very small space for a very long time, and I turned my face away from Gerald, because some grief is not meant to be witnessed, and some things a man needs to feel without an audience. When I finally lifted my head, my eyes were burning, and my throat felt scraped raw, and the kitchen clock read 4:41. There were still 2 more sheets of the letter I had not read. At the bottom of the second page, in slightly smaller handwriting, as though she had run low on space and was trying to fit everything. And Margaret had written one final line that I read 4 times before I could speak again. The research in that archive is not just data, Raymond. It is proof that Vivian is extraordinary, not because of what was done to her, but because of who she already was. They will try to make her into a resource. You and I both know she is a person. Do not let them forget that. And do not let yourself forget it either. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and held it in both hands. There is a place in Shawnee, I said. My voice was steadier now, worn smooth by what had just moved through it. Margaret built something there. I never asked enough questions about it. I know, Gerald said. I helped her set up the property trust. That is where we need to go. I looked at the clock. 4:43. Outside, the first pale light was beginning to separate the sky from the tree line. Then we need to leave now, I said. We were 20 minutes outside of Naperville when Gerald finally asked the question I had known was coming since the moment he walked through my door. Tell me about the Oaks Initiative. Outside the passenger window, Illinois in October looked like the end of something. The corn had been harvested weeks ago, and the fields on either side of Route 30 stretched flat and pale under a sky that had not yet decided what color it wanted to be. Gerald drove the way he did everything else steadily, without unnecessary movement, both hands on the wheel of his dark gray Chevrolet Suburban. I had been staring at those empty fields for several miles, watching the fence posts tick past, like a metronome trying to find the beginning of a story I had spent 23 years not telling. It started in 1998, I said. I was leading a research team at Northwestern. Molecular biology specifically focused on what we called adaptive immune expression. The question of whether the human immune system could, under specific conditions of extreme stress, reorganize itself at the genetic level in ways that were heritable and functionally superior to the baseline. I paused. Most of my colleagues thought the hypothesis was unprovable. I thought they were not looking at the right subjects. Gerald did not respond. He simply listened in the particular way of someone who has spent a career understanding that the most useful thing an attorney can do in certain moments is stay completely quiet. The project was funded through a combination of a private endowment from the Hargrove Foundation and a partial grant from the National Institutes of Health. I continued. The NIH portion covered roughly 30% of our operating costs. The rest came from private sources. That distinction matters because it meant the data we generated was not automatically the property of the federal government, though the government certainly believed otherwise when it became relevant. I watched a water tower pass on the right. The name of a town I did not recognize painted on its side in blue letters. In August of 2000, Vivian was involved in a car accident on Maple Avenue 3 blocks from her school. A driver ran a red light. The impact was severe enough that the paramedics who responded documented significant traumatic brain injury. The neurologist at Northwestern Memorial used the word catastrophic in his initial assessment. My voice went flat on that word, the way it always did when I returned to that day. Not because the emotion had faded, because some things the body learns to protect itself from by making the voice go very still. She was in the intensive care unit for 11 days. Gerald's grip on the steering wheel did not change. He kept his eyes on the road. On the 12th day, she woke up, I said. Fully alert, fully oriented, no measurable cognitive deficit. The damage that had been visible on her initial scans was gone. Not reduced. Gone. I pressed my thumb hard into my palm, feeling the pressure of it grounding myself in the physical sensation. The attending physicians attributed it to what they called spontaneous recovery, a rare but documented phenomenon. They wrote it up as an anomalous case and moved on. But you did not, Gerald said. I could not, I said. I was her father, yes, but I was also a molecular biologist who had spent 3 years studying exactly this type of immune-mediated cellular regeneration. I knew what I was looking at. I knew it was not spontaneous recovery in any conventional sense. I stopped. The next part was the part I had never said out loud to anyone. I called Elaine Corby. She was at the University of Chicago at the time running her own immunology lab. We had collaborated before. I trusted her completely. The fields outside had given way to a small cluster of houses, a gas station, a grain elevator. Gerald slowed for a stop sign and then accelerated back onto the empty road. I asked Elaine to come to the hospital under the pretext of a consult, I said. And while Vivian was sleeping, we drew blood samples without documenting it in the official hospital record. The words tasted exactly as bad coming out as they deserved to. Vivian did not know. Margaret did not know. I told myself I was protecting my daughter by understanding what had happened to her, that the knowledge would help me keep her safe. I felt the heat rise in my face, the particular shame of a justification that has worn thin from years of examination. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I have known it every day since. Gerald said nothing to that. Not absolution, not condemnation. He simply let it be what it was. The results confirmed what I suspected, I said. Vivian's immune system had restructured at the epigenetic level. The regenerative proteins her body was producing had no identified analog in existing research. What she could do biologically was something we did not have a framework for yet. I looked down at my hands in my lap. I expanded the project scope quietly. Under Elaine's guidance, we spent the next year mapping what we had found. By mid-2001, we had enough data to understand that we were looking at something that would rewrite entire fields of medicine. And then the government found out, Gerald said. A junior researcher on our team included a reference to anomalous immune findings in a routine NIH progress report, I said. He did not understand the significance of what he was flagging. Within 6 weeks, we had a federal oversight team in our lab. The memory tightened something in my throat. They wanted everything, all of it. Vivian's samples, the analysis, the full data set. They said it fell under federal jurisdiction because of the NIH funding. I said the NIH portion had not funded the work that produced these results. They disagreed. What did you do? I dissolved the project on paper, I said. Signed every document they put in front of me. Agreed to every term of the official closure. I turned to look at Gerald's profile for the first time in this conversation. And then I took the original data, the physical samples, and the complete analysis, and I removed them from the university entirely. Everything they received was a sanitized version of secondary findings. Nothing that would lead them anywhere useful. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. The road ahead was empty and straight, cutting through the flat October landscape toward a horizon that seemed to recede no matter how far we drove. You hid it in Shawnee, he said. Margaret hid it in Shawnee, I corrected. I told her I needed a place to store research materials that could not be associated with the university. She found the property, set up the trust, arranged everything. I felt the familiar weight of that settle back onto my shoulders, heavy and specific. I thought she was doing me a favor. I did not understand that she already knew why it truly needed to be hidden. Gerald took the on-ramp for Interstate 57 heading south without consulting a map or a phone. He had driven this route before. How much further, I asked. 3 hours, give or take, he said. We will be there before 9. I turned back to the window. The sky had made its decision and gone gray, the flat, colorless gray of an Illinois morning that had not made up its mind about rain. Somewhere behind us, Blake Fontaine was standing in front of Terminal 3 at O'Hare with a camera crew waiting for an arrest that was not going to happen. And somewhere ahead of us, in a forest in the southern part of this state, my wife had built something I had never fully understood. I was starting to. The highway was empty at that hour. The kind of empty that makes you feel like the rest of the world has already decided something you haven't been told yet. Gerald drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands flat on my thighs, watching the orange glow of suburban streetlights blur past the window and gradually give way to the flat black of open farmland. Neither of us spoke for the first several miles. There was nothing left to say about Margaret's letter, not yet. Some things need to settle before you can talk about them the way they deserve. It was Gerald who finally broke it somewhere past the interchange at Interstate 55, the engine humming low beneath us. She wrote it in November of 2004. He said. She called me 2 days before, asked if I still had the sealed envelope from 2 years prior. I told her I did. She said, "Good. Add this one inside." Same instructions. I turned to look at him. In the pale dashboard light, his face was lined and tired, but steady in the way that older men who have carried difficult things for a long time learn to be steady. "She never told you what was in it," I said. "No, and I didn't ask." He exhaled slowly. That was the agreement. I looked back at the road. The agreement. Margaret had spent years constructing a system of careful silences. What to tell me, what to tell Gerald, what to tell no one. She had understood something about Preston Caulfield long before I was willing to see it. Long before Vivian married him in the spring of 2016, Margaret had already begun preparing for the possibility that he would one day become dangerous. The thought sat in my chest like a stone. My phone buzzed on the center console. I reached for it without thinking. The screen showed a missed call from 40 minutes ago, Vivian. No voicemail. My hand tightened around the phone. "She called," I said. Gerald glanced at the screen. "Don't call back. Not yet." "Gerald, if Preston is monitoring her phone, a return call from you at 5 in the morning confirms you didn't board that flight." His voice was firm, not unkind. "Give it another hour. Once we're past Springfield, the cell towers are different, harder to triangulate." I hated that he was right. I set the phone face down and pressed 2 fingers to my temple, pushing back the beginning of a headache that had been threatening since Gerald knocked on my door. Vivienne. 34 years old, living in a Streeterville high-rise with a man who had been using her medical history as a financial instrument. The image of her face came to me the way it always did in difficult moments. Not as she was now, but as she had been at 10 years old, in the hospital bed, her small hands wrapped around the guardrail, asking me when she could go home. She had been so calm. That was what undid me most, even then. Her extraordinary calm. I had told myself it was her nature, her mother's gift to her. I had never let myself consider that it might be something more. Gerald's phone rang through the car speakers. The screen read Nora. He answered immediately. "I'm driving." "I know." Nora Finch's voice was low and careful. Gerald's wife of 31 years, a woman who had long ago learned that her husband's late-night calls meant something real was happening. The news ran a segment 20 minutes ago. Federal investigation into a biotech company called Nexogen Corporation, headquartered in Boston. They're calling it a potential securities fraud case. Gerald and I exchanged a look. "Securities fraud," he said slowly. "That's what they're calling it publicly," Nora said. But the reporter, a man named Blake Fontaine from WGN, he mentioned a Chicago connection. Said a source inside the FBI field office confirmed an Illinois resident is a person of interest. My stomach dropped 4 floors. "They're already moving the narrative," Gerald said, almost to himself. "Gerald." Nora's voice tightened. "Be careful, both of you." "We will." He ended the call. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from before. This one had edges. "Person of interest," I said. "Preston's legal team filed the guardianship petition sometime in the last 12 hours, Gerald said. "If they also fed a tip to a federal contact, then by the time I land in Boston, there's already a story waiting for me." I pressed my hand flat against the window glass. It was cold. "He's been building this for months." "Longer," Gerald said. The guardianship documents reference medical evaluations going back to spring of this year. 6 months of groundwork, Raymond. He was thorough. 6 months. While I had been working, traveling, attending conferences, believing my daughter's marriage was simply distant, in the way adult children's lives sometimes become distant, Preston Caulfield had been constructing a legal and media architecture designed to take everything from her and to use me as the mechanism that made it credible. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my back teeth. He needed you out of the country, Gerald continued. An arrest at a foreign airport or even just the appearance of flight would have been enough to suspend your legal standing as next of kin. The guardianship would have moved unopposed. And Vivian, Gerald's knuckles whitened briefly on the steering wheel. With you discredited and her classified as a research subject rather than a private citizen, Nexigen's legal claim to the data becomes arguable in federal court. It wouldn't win, but it would tie everything up long enough for them to act. I turned the phone over in my hands. Vivian's name on the missed call screen. 6 months. She had been living inside this for 6 months. The first thin light of morning was beginning to separate the sky from the fields in the east, a narrow band of gray-blue that made everything look temporary, provisional, like the world was still deciding what kind of day it intended to be. Then Gerald's phone buzzed again. Not Nora this time, a number I didn't recognize. He stared at it for 1 second, then 2. Then he answered it. A man's voice said, "Mr. Finch, this is Detective Ray Stubbs, Chicago PD. I think we need to talk about Raymond Oakes before this gets much worse." Gerald did not put the call on speaker. He held the phone to his ear with one hand and kept the other on the wheel. And I watched his face the way you watch a doctor's expression when they're reading your results, looking for the thing they haven't said yet. He spoke 4 times during the call. Yes. Then when was the filing time-stamped? Then does he know about the property in Williamson County? And finally, give us until noon. He ended the call and set the phone in the cup holder. I waited exactly 3 seconds. Tell me. Detective Stubbs has been watching Preston Caulfield for 6 weeks, Gerald said. Not because of us, because of a separate complaint. A former Nexigen contractor filed a whistleblower claim with the Illinois Attorney General's office in August. Stubbs was assigned to the financial thread. He found Preston's name in the contractor's records. Then he's already building a case. He was. Until last night when someone inside the Cook County Clerk's office flagged the guardianship petition and called a contact at the FBI field office. Stubbs got pushed to the side. Federal jurisdiction, they told him. Gerald's mouth tightened at the corner. He doesn't like being pushed to the side. So he called you. He called me because your name appeared in the petition as the subject of the competency filing, and my name appeared as the attorney associated with Margaret's estate. He wanted to know if we were aware of what had been submitted. Gerald finally looked at me. He also said, and I want you to hear this carefully, that the federal agents assigned to this case received their briefing from a source inside Nexigen's legal team, not from an independent investigation. From Nexigen. The farmland outside had been replaced by something older and quieter. The highway narrowing the tree lines, thickening the light going green and diffuse as southern Illinois gradually became itself. I had not been to this part of the state in more than 20 years, and the landscape was doing something to me that I hadn't prepared for. It was pressing memory up through the present, the way water presses up through cracked pavement. Stubbs is giving us until noon, I said. He's giving us until noon before he's obligated to report that he made contact. Gerald turned off the main road onto a 2-lane route marked with a brown recreational area sign. After that, he says it's out of his hands. And does he know about the cabin? No, I was careful not to confirm it. We drove another 40 minutes without speaking. The road climbed slightly, the oaks closing in on both sides, their leaves just beginning to turn that particular October gold that makes everything look like it's being preserved rather than dying. I pressed my hand against the cold glass again and thought about Margaret driving this same road in 2004, alone carrying things she needed to hide from me in order to protect me. I thought about what that kind of love costs a person. The daily weight of it. My throat closed without warning. I pressed my fist briefly to my mouth, breathed through my nose, and let it pass. Gerald turned onto an unpaved track barely wide enough for the car, the tires crunching over gravel and fallen leaves, and after a quarter-mile the trees opened up and the cabin appeared. It was smaller than I remembered. Low and dark-timbered, set back against a limestone shelf, with a rusted weather vane on the roof that had frozen pointing southwest sometime in the last 2 decades. Margaret's family had owned this property since the 1980s, 4 acres in Williamson County, 14 miles outside Harrisburg, the deed registered under her maiden name, Oakes being her married name. Preston would have needed to run a thorough title search under her birth name to find it. We had, for the moment, the advantage of obscurity. Gerald killed the engine. Neither of us moved immediately. There is a particular stillness to arriving at a place that holds grief for you the way your body knows, before your mind does, that something in here is going to cost you something. I got out of the car. The air smelled of cedar and wet limestone, and the faint sweetness of decomposing leaves. My breath fogged in front of me. I found the key where Margaret's letter had said it would be inside a rusted tobacco tin wedged behind the second porch post, from the left wrapped in an oilcloth that had kept it dry for God knows how long. The lock turned. Inside the cabin was dim and cool, the windows shuttered. Dust on every surface, but the structure was sound. Margaret had arranged for a property management company in Harrisburg to handle basic maintenance roof pipes foundation. Anonymous billing through a trust account Gerald had administered. She had thought of everything. I found the cellar door in the kitchen floor, beneath the rag rug, exactly where her letter had described. The latch was a simple barrel bolt. I pulled it open and Gerald shone his phone light down the stairs. The room below was approximately 15 by 12 feet. The walls were poured concrete. A dehumidifier newer than the rest of the cabin, replaced within the last 3 years, according to the service sticker, hummed faintly in the corner. Metal shelving units ran along 2 walls, each shelf labeled in Margaret's handwriting, with a year range and a project designation. Binders. Hard drives in sealed static-proof bags. A fireproof filing cabinet. And on a small table in the center of the room, a laptop computer. Plugged in. A small green charging light blinking steadily as if it had been waiting. A strip of masking tape across the lid. Margaret's handwriting in black marker. Raymond watched this first. My hand reached for it and then stopped hovering an inch above the lid. 20 years of not knowing exactly what she had known. 20 years of trusting the silence she had built around us without ever asking what it contained. And now here it was, whatever she had needed to say, but could not say while she was alive, compressed into a single laptop in a room that smelled of concrete and cedar and time. Gerald stepped up beside me. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I lifted the lid. The screen did not load slowly. It came on all at once, a clean white rectangle filling the dim cellar with cold light. And then her face appeared. And every carefully maintained thing inside me came undone in an instant. She was younger than I last remembered her. 58, perhaps 59. Her dark hair still mostly dark, her reading glasses pushed up on her head the way she always wore them when she was thinking. She was sitting at a desk I did not recognize, not our kitchen, not her study at home, somewhere neutral. A bare wall behind her, a single lamp to her left, casting warm light across her face. She looked directly into the camera. "Raymond," she said, "if you're watching this, then Gerald did his job. And I'm glad. I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you took me a long time to understand, and I need you to understand it too." Her voice. I had forgotten the specific quality of it, the way it carried patience and precision, In equal measure, the way she could make even difficult things sound like something you could hold in two hands and examine. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall. My legs had stopped cooperating with the rest of me. Beside me, Gerald stood with his arms folded across his chest, his eyes fixed on the screen. His jaw was working slightly the way it did when he was holding something in. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "I need to start with Dr. Elaine Corby." I straightened. "Elaine came to me in the spring of 2003. Margaret continued. "Not to you, Raymond. To me. She said she had spent 2 years trying to find a way to tell you directly, and each time she lost her nerve. So she came to me instead." Margaret's expression shifted, not quite sadness, something more like the look of a person who has long since made peace with a painful fact. "She told me that what you and she found in Vivian's tissue samples in 2000 was not an anomaly. It was a blueprint, a self-correcting epigenetic sequence that, under the right laboratory conditions, could be reverse-engineered into a regenerative therapy protocol worth, and these were her words, more than any single pharmaceutical patent in the last 30 years. The number landed in the cellar, the way large numbers do, when they stop being abstract. $847 million was what Nexogen had put on it 2 decades later. But in 2003, before the industry had fully understood what it was looking at, it had been valued at something closer to 300 million, still enough to make dangerous people move. "Elaine told me she had been approached," Margaret said. "A consultant from a firm she didn't recognize at the time. He asked questions about the Oaks initiative that no one outside the project should have been able to ask. She gave him nothing. But she was frightened. So she came to me." Margaret paused. She took her glasses off her head and set them on the desk. "I did 3 things after that conversation. First, I asked Gerald to run a quiet background check on anyone connected to the Hargrove Foundation's grant committee." She glanced briefly off camera, a habit she had, looking slightly left when she was ordering her thoughts. Second, I commissioned Elaine to design what she called a containment protocol. A second archive identical in structure to the real one, plausible enough to pass an initial technical review, but containing data sequences that were subtly non-functional. A decoy. If anyone extracted it and ran it through their own laboratory systems, the results would appear promising for approximately 72 hours before the inconsistencies became apparent. Enough time for us to know an extraction had occurred and to act. Gerald exhaled slowly beside me. I did not look at him. I could not take my eyes off her face. "Third," Margaret said, and her voice dropped slightly, "I started paying attention to Preston Caulfield." My chest tightened. In 2003, Preston was barely 17, just finishing high school. And yet his name was already appearing in the financial records of people who had no business knowing a teenager. He was not yet in Vivian's life, he wouldn't be for another decade. But his name appeared in Gerald's background search connected to the Hargrove Foundation through a consulting subsidiary based in Delaware. A very small connection. A thread. She looked directly into the camera again. I pulled it. What followed was 8 minutes of Margaret explaining in the careful and methodical way she had explained everything in her life, exactly what she had found. Preston's academic history, a doctorate in molecular economics from Georgetown, an obscure discipline that sits at the intersection of biological research and financial valuation. His early career consulting for pharmaceutical firms seeking acquisition targets. His connection to Nexogen Corporation, which at that point was still a mid-sized biotech operating out of Boston, hungry for a proprietary breakthrough that would move it into the first tier. And then in 2013, his arrival in Chicago. "I don't believe it was a coincidence," Margaret said. "I believe he found Vivian because he was looking for her. Because somewhere in the records he had accessed, and I don't know how he accessed them, but someone with resources finds a way. Her name was connected to the Oaks initiative." Her hands were flat on the desk, now very still. He is patient, Raymond. That is the thing you need to understand about him. He is extraordinarily patient, and he has been building toward this for a very long time. The video ran another 2 minutes. Margaret describing the location of the decoy server, the activation sequence, a secondary hard drive she had labeled with a red mark on the shelf behind me. Then she looked into the camera one final time. "I love you," she said simply. "Take care of our girl." The screen went dark. The cellar was very quiet. The dehumidifier hummed. Somewhere above us, a branch scraped the cabin roof in the October wind. I could not speak. My eyes burned in a way I had not felt in years, a deep, pressing heat that built behind my face until I had to drop my chin to my chest and breathe through it. Gerald put one hand briefly on my shoulder, one hand just for a moment, and then he took it away. When I finally looked up, he was staring at the dark screen with an expression I had never seen on him before. Something between guilt and grief. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. "About the background check. About what I found, and what I chose not to report." I did not give him time to arrange his words. "How long?" I said. Gerald turned from the dark screen. His hands dropped to his sides. He did not reach for composure the way most people do when they are caught. He simply stood there and let the weight of it settle on him, and somehow that was worse than any excuse would have been. "I found the Delaware subsidiary in 2003, he said. "When Margaret asked me to run the background check on the Hargrove Foundation's grant committee, Preston's name appeared in the corporate filing as a junior consultant. He was barely 17 at the time, which was precisely what made it so difficult to treat as an actionable threat. The connection to Nexogen wasn't direct. It was two entities removed a layered structure. I flagged it in my notes." He stopped. "I didn't put it in my report to Margaret." The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "You didn't tell her," I said. "I told her there was a peripheral connection to the foundation, and that I would continue monitoring. I did not tell her the name." His voice was even, flat in the way that voices go flat when a person has rehearsed a confession so many times in their own head that the emotion has been worn smooth. Margaret accepted that. She trusted my professional judgment. I crossed the cellar in 4 steps. Not toward him, there was nowhere to go. The room was too small, just moving, because standing still was no longer something my body could manage. My hands were open at my sides, which was the only thing keeping them from becoming fists. "She spent years investigating Preston herself," I said. "Everything she described in that video, pulling the thread, tracing his career, watching him move toward Chicago. She did all of that without the one piece of information that would have let her act earlier. Because you held it back." Gerald did not flinch. "Yes. Why?" The single syllable sat in the air between us. Gerald looked at it for a moment before he answered. "Because Margaret specifically instructed me not to act on anything related to the Oaks Initiative without her direct authorization," he said. "And because at the time a teenager with a two-entity removed connection to a foundation was not in my professional judgment an actionable threat. He was a data point. I chose to hold it until I had more." He paused. "And then more never came cleanly, and the years moved. And by 2013, when he arrived in Chicago and I ran his background again and found everything Margaret had already found independently." "He paid you," I said. Gerald went very still. I had not known I was going to say it until it came out of my mouth. But something in his hesitation had pointed me there, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his breath had shifted, and I had followed it the way you follow a sound in a dark room. "How much?" I said, a long pause. "Then $180,000 over the course of 2014. Corporate consultation, a restructuring matter for a holding company he was managing. Entirely legal work. Entirely separate, as far as I could verify at the time, from anything connected to you or Vivian or the Oaks Initiative." The number dropped into the room like something heavy. "You did legal work for the man who was planning to steal my daughter's genetic data," I said, while serving as the executor of my wife's estate. "Yes." Gerald's voice did not break, but something behind it shifted a pressure like a wall that has been holding water for a very long time. And I have had to live with that every day since I understood what he was. The work was finished before I made the connection. By the time I put the full picture together in 2015, the fees had been paid, the matter was closed, and Preston was already established in Vivian's life. "You could have told me." Margaret asked me not to act without her authorization. He met my eyes. She was still alive in 2015, Raymond. I went to her. I told her everything: the fee, the corporate work, the conflict. She heard it all. She told me to document it, keep it sealed, and say nothing to you until it became necessary. His voice tightened slightly. "She said you would try to end Vivian's relationship with Preston immediately, without enough evidence to do it cleanly, and that would only drive him underground and make him more dangerous." I stood very still. She had been right. That was the thing I could not argue with, standing in this concrete room, with the smell of cedar and time pressing in from every direction. Margaret had been right. If she had told me in 2015, I would have gone to Vivian that same week without enough proof to be believed, and Preston would have had years to reposition himself. My anger did not disappear, but it shifted from Gerald to something larger and more diffuse, something that had no single face to direct itself toward. "The 180,000, I said finally. "Do you still have records of it? Every invoice, every transfer, documented and sealed in my office safe." He straightened slightly. "It demonstrates a financial relationship between Preston and the attorney managing Margaret's estate. In the context of the guardianship petition, that is evidence of coordinated fraud. It works against him, not against me." I rubbed the back of my neck. The headache had returned, sitting low behind my eyes like something that intended to stay. "Stubbs needs to know about this," I said. "I know. And the FBI, I know, Raymond." Something in Gerald's voice finally cracked just slightly at the edges. "I know." I turned toward the stairs. That was when we heard it. 3 knocks on the cellar door above us. Slow. Deliberate. 1, then a pause, then 2 more, a rhythm that was unmistakably intentional, not the random settling of an old cabin. Gerald and I both looked up at the same moment. Then a voice came through the wood. Young and clear and completely familiar. The voice of the person I had been terrified to call since 5 in the morning. "Dad." A breath. "It's me, don't be afraid. We are right in the middle of this now. And I promise you, what comes through that cabin door next will change everything you thought you understood about this family story. But before I go any further, type "still here" in the comments so I know you are with me. Every single comment means the world. A gentle reminder. This story contains some fictional elements built for entertainment and meaningful reflection. If that is not something you wish to continue with, this is a perfectly good place to step away and find something that suits you better. I took the stairs faster than my knees had any right to allow. The cellar door swung open before I reached the top step, and the gray October light came flooding down, and Vivian was standing in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on and her hair pulled back, and an expression on her face that I had last seen on her mother. That particular combination of relief and resolve that looks almost like calm until you get close enough to see what it is actually costing. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and pulled her into my arms without a word. She made a sound against my shoulder. Not quite a sob, something smaller and more compressed, as though she had been holding it at a specific pressure for a very long time, and my arms had changed the conditions just enough to let a fraction of it out. Her hands gripped the back of my jacket. I could feel her shaking just slightly, in the way that people shake when they have stopped shaking deliberately and finally allowed their body to tell the truth. I pressed my hand to the back of her head. "I've got you," I said. It was the only thing I could find. She pulled back first. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and she wiped her face with the back of her wrist, in a single, quick motion, her mother's gesture so precisely, her mother's gesture, that something in my chest lurched sideways. "I tried to call you," she said. "I know. I couldn't call back. We were being careful. I know you were." She glanced past me to where Gerald had come up the stairs behind me and now stood in the kitchen doorway, his arms folded, his expression carefully neutral. Something passed between them, not warmth exactly, but the look of two people who have been in careful contact with each other without my knowledge. I looked at Gerald. "How long?" I said. "I seem to be asking that question a great deal this morning." 3 weeks, Gerald said. She contacted my office. I advised her on how to document what she had found without compromising its admissibility. I turned back to Vivian. She reached into the interior pocket of her coat and produced a USB drive, small black, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, and held it between 2 fingers. 47 emails, she said, between Preston and a man named Fletcher Vane who serves as Nexagen's primary acquisitions intermediary. 3 signed contracts, 2 in preliminary form, 1 fully executed for the licensing of proprietary biological data. The executed contract is valued at $180 million. Her voice was steady and precise, the voice of someone who has recited these facts enough times to have stripped the shaking out of them. The contracts reference the data by a project designation, Oaks Initiative Series 7B. They do not name me by name, but the biological parameters described in the contracts match my medical records from 2000 to 2001 with a specificity that leaves no ambiguity. I took the USB drive from her hand. It weighed almost nothing. 6 months, I said. 5 months and 3 weeks. She sat down at the kitchen table, the old pine table that had been in this cabin since Margaret's parents owned it, and pressed both palms flat on the surface, looking at them. "I found the first email in April. I wasn't looking for it. I was going through a filing cabinet in Preston's home office looking for our car insurance documents, and I found a folder I didn't recognize. A printed email chain. I read the first page before I understood what I was reading." She looked up. "And then I read all of it." Gerald moved to the table and sat across from her. I remained standing, turning the USB drive over in my fingers. "April to October," I said. "You stayed. You stayed in that apartment with him for 6 months after you found this." Something crossed her face, not quite pain, something more deliberate. "I needed more than 1 email chain. I needed the contracts. The third one, the executed contract, he didn't sign that until August. I had to wait." She met my eyes without apology. "Mom's letter told me to wait. The copy she left for me." I went very still. "She left you a letter too," I said. "A different one. Shorter." Vivian's voice was quieter now. "She wrote it when I was in college. She didn't tell me about the research, just about Preston. His name, his background, a photograph. She told me that if he ever entered my life, I should say nothing, gather everything, and come here." A pause. "She said you would be here." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, packed with 20 years of Margaret thinking 17 moves ahead of everyone in the room, including me, including all of us. Gerald cleared his throat. "The contracts reference Fletcher Vane as the executing intermediary. With his name documented in the email chain, we have a direct link between Preston and Nexagen that bypasses any claim of independent research." He looked at Vivian. "That is the piece that makes the federal case." "I know," she said. "Gerald explained it." I set the USB drive on the table between us. Outside, the wind moved through the oaks and the cabin's old timbers settled with a sound like a slow breath. Then Vivian looked toward the window. Her expression shifted just slightly, the way a person's expression shifts when they are managing a piece of information they have not yet delivered. "There is one more thing," she said carefully. I followed her gaze toward the gravel track visible through the window's edge. A second car was parked behind hers. Dark blue, older model Illinois plates. I had not noticed it when we arrived. It had not been there when we arrived. You didn't come alone, I said. No. Vivian folded her hands on the table. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it, but I needed someone who already knew the legal architecture of what Preston had built. She paused. Someone who helped build part of it and has been trying to undo that ever since. She did not say the name. She just watched my face, waiting for what it would do. Dr. Corby, I said. It was not a greeting. It came out flat and hard the way a name sounds when you have been holding it in your mouth like something sharp for the better part of 20 years. Elaine Corby stepped through the cabin door behind Vivian and stopped just inside the threshold. She was 65, shorter than I remembered, her white hair cut close, her hands folded in front of her, with the careful stillness of someone who has learned not to make sudden movements around people she has hurt. She was wearing a gray wool coat and carrying nothing. She looked at me the way people look at you when they have already decided they will accept whatever you give them. Raymond, she said, you helped him build it, I said. The valuation framework. The data classification system that made Vivian's profile licensable under federal research exemptions. My voice was controlled, but only just. You gave him the technical language that made $847 million look like a legitimate commercial asset. Yes. She did not look away. In 2014, before I understood what he intended to do with it, before I understood what kind of man he was. She took a breath that seemed to cost her something. I have been working with Agent Donna Pierce at the Chicago FBI field office for 2 years. Everything I built for Preston, I have spent those 2 years dismantling from the inside. The room held that for a moment. Gerald moved to the kitchen counter and leaned against it. Agent Pierce is aware of this meeting, he said quietly. Dr. Corby contacted her last night. Pierce knows we are at this location. I looked at Gerald. You knew she was coming. I knew it was a possibility. He held my gaze without apology. I judged it better to tell you in person than over the phone. I wanted to argue. I found I did not have the energy for it, not with the noon deadline already passed, not with Vivian standing 3 feet away, watching me with that steady, careful expression. I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen wall and made myself breathe. Fine, I said. Then tell me what you know. Dr. Corby opened her mouth to answer. That was when we heard the tires on the gravel. All 4 of us went still at exactly the same moment, that particular collective stillness that happens when a group of people hears a sound and arrives at the same conclusion simultaneously. Gerald pushed off the counter. Vivian turned toward the window. I moved to stand beside her. A single black SUV was moving slowly up the gravel track, crushing leaves under its tires, stopping 20 feet from the cabin's front steps. He found it, Gerald said. The easement, Dr. Corby said, her voice dropping. The 2014 restructuring documents referenced a Williamson County property under the name Oaks Hargrove. I told him it was a legacy land holding with no current relevance. He must have kept the reference. The SUV's engine cut off. A door opened. Gerald straightened and reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a small rectangular device, a digital audio recorder, the kind used in legal depositions, and set it on the kitchen table without ceremony. He looked around the room. Illinois one-party consent, he said. I am a party to this conversation. The recording is lawful. Everything said in this room from this moment forward is on the record. He looked at each of us in turn. Say nothing you would not say in a deposition, and let him talk. Preston Caulfield walked through the cabin door like a man arriving at a meeting he had scheduled himself. He was 38, tall, with the kind of controlled physical presence that comes from years of understanding exactly how much space to take up in a room. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt, no tie, and he carried nothing, no briefcase, no folder, no visible phone. He took in the room in one slow scan, Gerald at the counter, Dr. Corby near the door, me by the window, Then his eyes found Vivian. He stopped. Something moved across his face, something I might have mistaken for tenderness if I had not spent this morning learning exactly what he was. "Vivian," he said. She looked back at him. Her arms were at her sides. Her chin was level. She did not move toward him or away from him, and her face held an expression I had never seen on her before, a complete, deliberate neutrality, like a surface that has decided to reflect nothing. "Preston," she said. He let a moment pass. Then he looked at me. "Raymond." His voice was easy, unhurried. "I want you to know I came here to resolve this quietly. No law enforcement, no press. Just a conversation between people who understand what's at stake." He glanced at the cellar door, still slightly ajar, and then back at me. "There are people in Boston who have been waiting for this data for a very long time. They are not patient people. I would prefer to give them what they are waiting for through an arrangement that protects everyone in this room, including Vivian." Gerald said nothing. Dr. Corby said nothing. I said nothing. Preston reached into his jacket pocket and produced a single folded document. He set it on the pine table beside Gerald's recorder without looking at either of them. "A licensing agreement," he said. 12 pages. Raymond signs as the originating researcher, Vivian signs as the biological source. Nexogen receives full commercial rights to the Series 7B data. In exchange, he paused, and the pause was precise and calculated. "The guardianship petition is withdrawn. The federal inquiry goes away. And everyone walks out of here without a legal problem in the world." He looked at Vivian again. "It's the only version of this that ends cleanly," he said. Vivian held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she said very quietly, "How did you know about the USB drive, Preston?" The temperature in the room dropped 4 degrees. Preston's expression did not change, but his eyes moved just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, to Gerald's face. "Before I reveal what Preston says next, and I want you to understand what he is about to say will redefine this entire story, I need to ask you something. Type the number 11 in the comments if you are still here with me right now. Because what comes next in this Grandpa Stories chapter is the moment everything breaks open. One quick note: portions of this story include fictional elements crafted for education and reflection. If you would prefer to stop here, there is no judgment. Choose what is right for you." Preston did not answer Vivian's question. He looked at her for exactly the length of time it takes a careful man to decide that answering a question directly is less useful than replacing it with a larger one. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down at the pine table as though he had been invited, as though this cabin were any room in any building where business was conducted and agreements were reached. "Let me tell you what you are," he said to her. "Not who, what." Vivian did not move. I took one step forward and Gerald's hand came up slightly at his side, not touching me, just present a quiet signal. I stopped. Preston folded his hands on the table. "In 2000, when your father's team analyzed your tissue samples following your accident, they identified something that occurs in approximately 1 in 600 million people," he said. "A spontaneous epigenetic reorganization, a restructuring of the way your cells read and execute their own repair instructions. Not a mutation, not a disease, a refinement." He said the last word the way certain people say words they find beautiful. Your immune system does not simply respond to damage, it anticipates it. It prepositions repair proteins at sites of cellular stress before damage becomes clinically measurable. I was watching Vivian's face. She was watching Preston's. "The commercial application," Preston continued, "is a therapy protocol for autoimmune and neurodegenerative conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, early-stage Parkinson's. A synthetic analog of your repair sequence introduced as a targeted gene therapy. Nexogen has been developing the delivery mechanism for 6 years. The only thing missing is the original data set, the complete epigenetic map that your father recorded and your mother hid." He looked at me then. That is what is in this room. That is what is on that server downstairs. And that is what is worth $847 million in current pharmaceutical market valuation. The kitchen was very quiet. You don't need me, Vivian said. You need the data. Correct. You are not the product, Vivian. You never were. Something in his voice almost softened. You are the source document. Once we have a complete verified copy of the data set, your involvement ends. The licensing agreement on this table gives you legal standing as the originating biological source, which means Nexogen owes you attribution liability protection and a share of the commercial proceeds. And my father. Your father is cleared of all federal inquiry the moment he signs as the originating researcher. Preston's eyes moved to me. The guardianship petition is withdrawn. The WGN story goes away. You go back to Naperville and continue your life, and the work you began 24 years ago goes on to help millions of people. He let that sit. That is not a threat, Raymond. That is the best version of what this becomes. I looked at him across the kitchen. This man who had spent a decade maneuvering himself into position, who had married my daughter as a vector of access, who had constructed a legal apparatus designed to neutralize me and isolate her. And I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage. Something colder and more clarifying than rage. I felt the specific grief of watching someone reduce everything you have loved to a line item. Dr. Corby made a sound. Not a word. Something involuntary, as though Preston's clean summary of the commercial framework had pressed against something in her that was not yet entirely numb. She turned slightly away from the table, her hand going to the kitchen counter for support. Her knuckles were white. I noticed that. I filed it away. You helped him build that framework, I said to her, not accusing, stating. I built the valuation model, she said without turning back. I described the therapeutic application. I calculated the patent ceiling. Her voice was thin. I did not know he intended to use a fraudulent guardianship filing to remove you from the picture. I did not know about the federal inquiry. I thought... She stopped. Started again. I thought it was going to be a negotiated licensing arrangement, approached directly, with consent. With consent, Preston repeated, and there was something in the way he said it that made the word sound like a formality he had long since moved past. Vivienne turned to look at me, and for the first time since she had walked through that cabin door, her expression changed. The careful neutrality shifted, and what came through underneath it was not vulnerability, but something else entirely. A kind of steadiness that recognized itself. I knew, she said quietly, about the science, about what my profile means. Dr. Corby explained it to me 3 weeks ago when Gerald introduced us. She looked at Preston. I have known what I am scientifically for 3 weeks. I have known what you intended to do with it for 5 months before that. Preston went very still. I was not sitting across from you at dinner every night for 5 months in shock, she said. I was building a record. Something moved across Preston's face than the first thing I had seen on him all afternoon. That was not calculated. It was fast, and he controlled it quickly, but it was there, a crack in the surface, a fraction of a second, where the architecture showed through. He looked at Gerald, then at the recorder on the table. Gerald's recorder emitted a soft, clean tone. A single note, brief and digital, the kind of confirmation sound that well-designed equipment makes when a task completes automatically. Preston's eyes dropped to the device. Secure external server, Gerald said without inflection. Encrypted, time-stamped, transmitted the moment you walked through that door. Preston looked up from the recorder. The ease was gone from his face entirely now. What replaced it was something sharper and considerably less composed. He did not speak, but his hands still folded on the table, pressed together until the knuckles went pale. Preston unfolded his hands. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way a person does when they are reassembling themselves from the inside out, smoothing the surface back into place, one careful layer at a time. He looked at Gerald's recorder on the table, then at Gerald, and something behind his eyes made a decision I could see being made without being able to stop it. "You've transmitted a recording," he said, "to a server I cannot access, containing a conversation in which I presented a legal licensing agreement and invited a voluntary resolution." He spread his hands slightly. "That is not evidence of a crime, Gerald. That is evidence of a business negotiation." Gerald looked at him with the particular expression of a man who has been practicing law for 35 years and has heard every version of this argument. "The conversation also contains your acknowledgement of a federal inquiry you claim you can make disappear," he said. "Your reference to a guardianship petition as a negotiating instrument, and your presence at a private property you accessed through documents obtained during a conflicted legal engagement." He tilted his head slightly. "You are welcome to characterize all of that as a business negotiation. A federal prosecutor will characterize it differently." Preston absorbed this. Then he stood up from the table. "I came here to resolve this quietly," he said. "You have made that difficult." He looked toward the kitchen floor, toward the cellar door, still slightly ajar, the darkness below it just visible. "But the data is still here, and that is ultimately the only thing that matters." He moved toward the cellar door. I did not stop him. I looked at Dr. Corby, and she gave me the smallest possible nod, barely a movement, just a fraction of her chin dropping and rising, and I understood. I stepped back and let him go. He pulled the cellar door open and went down the stairs. His footsteps were deliberate and unhurried on the wooden steps, the footsteps of a man who has decided that if conversation will not work, access will. Vivian turned to Dr. Corby the moment he was below. "The trigger," she said quietly. "Any external drive connected to the secondary port on the left server unit activates the containment protocol," Dr. Corby said, her voice low and precise. "The decoy archive transfers automatically. The real data remains on the primary unit, which requires a 12-character alphanumeric key to access. He does not have that key." "He'll try to take the whole unit," Gerald said. "The unit is bolted to the concrete shelf," Dr. Corby said. "Margaret's instruction. I installed the hardware myself in 2004. I looked at her. 20 years ago, she had been in this cellar bolting a server unit to a concrete shelf on the instruction of my wife, building a system designed to outlast both of them. The image of it did something to my chest that I was not prepared for, a strange, delayed gratitude that had nowhere clean to land. Then she said, 'There is something I need to tell you about the USB drive.'" Vivienne went still. Dr. Corby looked at her hands. 3 weeks ago, before I had fully committed to working with Agent Pierce, I had a final contact with a Nexigen intermediary. I was still trying to manage both sides. I am not proud of it." She looked up at Vivian. "During that conversation, I mentioned that you had been gathering documentation. I did not specify what form it took, but I said enough." Her voice dropped. "The USB reference came from me, not from Gerald." The relief that moved through the room was almost physical. I felt Gerald's shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, and I felt my own jaw unclench in a way I had not noticed it had been clenched. But the relief was complicated because the woman standing in front of us was also the woman who had nearly handed Vivian's evidence to the other side. Vivian looked at Dr. Corby for a long moment. Then she said, "Did you tell them what was on it?" "No, only that documentation existed." "Then it's done," Vivian said. "Not forgiving, not condemning, simply closing the account." From below us came the sound of equipment, a port connecting, a soft electronic tone as a drive was inserted. Then the low hum of a data transfer beginning. I looked at the cellar door. Preston had found what he was looking for, or what he believed he was looking for. We waited. 4 minutes. Gerald checked his watch once. Dr. Corby stood with her arms folded, looking at the middle distance. Vivian sat back down at the pine table and placed both hands flat on the surface, steady, patient, in the way that people are patient when they know how something ends. Preston's footsteps came back up the stairs. He came through the cellar door and straightened his jacket and looked at the room with an expression that had rearranged itself once more. The control was back, smoother now, almost relaxed. He crossed to the east-facing window and held his phone up at the corner where the ceiling met the wall, tilting it slightly, searching. One bar appeared. He watched the screen. His thumb moved. A message sent. 30 seconds passed. Then his phone vibrated once in his hand, and he looked down at it, and something went out of his face, the last of the tension, the last of the tightly managed uncertainty. His chest expanded on a slow breath. He lowered the phone and turned to face me, and for the first time all afternoon, his expression held something that was almost human. "Fletcher has confirmed receipt," he said. 2.3 terabytes, clean transfer. He looked at me with something that might in a different life have been respect. "It's over, Raymond." I looked back at him and said nothing. It was Dr. Corby who spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not move from where she stood by the counter. She simply said with the flat precision of someone delivering a clinical result, "That is not the real data, Preston." Preston stood at the east window with his phone in his hand, and Dr. Corby's words hanging in the air between them, like something with weight and temperature. For a moment, he did not move. Then he turned to face her, and what was on his face was not anger. It was the expression of a man recalculating very quickly, running numbers against new variables, trying to find a version of the equation that still worked. "A decoy archive," he said. "Designed in 2004, Dr. Corby said. "At Margaret Oakes's request. I built the containment protocol myself. The transfer you triggered sends a structurally plausible but functionally non-viable data set. The sequences are internally consistent for approximately 72 hours before the errors become apparent in laboratory conditions." She looked at him steadily. "Fletcher Vane is currently in possession of 2.3 terabytes of data that will tell him nothing useful." Something in Preston's jaw shifted, a muscle tightening and releasing, tightening again. He looked at the cellar door, then at me, then at Vivian. "The real data," he said. "It's still down there." "It is," I said. "Then this is not over." "Preston." Gerald's voice was quiet and entirely without drama. "Listen." We all heard it at the same moment, the sound of vehicles on the gravel track, more than one, moving at the unhurried pace of people who know exactly where they are going and have no need to hurry because the situation is already contained. Not the single crunch of one SUV. Something heavier. Multiple engines moving in formation. Preston turned back to the window. 3 vehicles came up the track, 2 dark sedans, and a third marked with the blue and white of the Illinois State Police. They stopped in a line behind Preston's SUV, and before the engines had fully cut off, the doors were opening, and figures in dark jackets were stepping out with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who do this for a living. I counted 5 agents, and behind them, getting out of the lead sedan's passenger side, a woman in her mid-40s in a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back, moving toward the cabin with the focused deliberateness of someone arriving at a place she has been building toward for 2 years. Behind her, from the second sedan, came Detective Ray Stubbs, broad-shouldered 52, in a jacket that did not quite fit, the way federal agents' jackets fit, which somehow made him look more trustworthy than all of them combined. The cabin door opened without a knock. "Mr. Caulfield." Agent Donna Pierce stepped inside and took in the room in the same single scan that Preston had used when he arrived, except hers was faster and considerably more thorough. "I'm Special Agent Donna Pierce, FBI, Chicago Field Office." She held up her credentials. "You are not required to say anything at this time, and I strongly suggest you don't." Preston looked at her. His phone was still in his hand. He set it on the windowsill with a deliberateness that was the last act of a man who has decided that the only remaining asset he has is his composure. "I'd like to speak with my attorney," he said. "You'll have that opportunity," Pierce said. She nodded to the agent nearest the door, who moved to Preston's side with the quiet efficiency of someone following a procedure they have rehearsed many times. Detective Stubbs came through the door behind Pierce and stopped just inside the threshold. He was looking at Gerald. Gerald was looking at him. Something passed between them, not warmth, not quite, but the specific acknowledgement of two men who have been working the same puzzle from opposite ends and have just discovered they were both right. Stubbs gave a single nod. Gerald returned it. Agent Pierce turned to me. "Dr. Oakes?" Her voice changed slightly, still professional, but without the edge. "I want to be direct with you. You are not a subject of this investigation. The federal inquiry referenced in this morning's media reporting was initiated based on information provided by Nexagen's legal team, which we now have substantial reason to believe was fabricated as part of a coordinated fraud. The guardianship petition filed in Cook County has been flagged and will be suspended pending review." She paused. "You came here to protect your daughter. That is consistent with everything in our file." Something behind my sternum released a pressure I had been carrying since 4 o'clock in the morning. So constant that I had stopped registering it as pressure and had simply incorporated it into the way I was breathing. It went out of me like air from a room that has finally been opened. Vivian's hand found mine. I had not seen her move. She was simply there, her fingers closing around mine, and I held on with both hands the way you hold on to something you have been afraid of losing for so long that the fear and the love have become the same thing. I heard Pierce giving instructions to the other agents, the Nexagen contract on the table. Preston's phone the seller server as evidence under active federal warrant. I heard Preston being walked to one of the sedans outside. I heard Stubbs saying something to Gerald in a low voice, Gerald responding in kind. I did not hear any of it clearly. I was looking at Vivian's profile, the line of her jaw, the way she was watching the room with those steady dark eyes, and thinking about how much she looked like her mother, and how Margaret had spent 20 years building a net wide enough to catch all of this, and how she had never once let any of us see her doing it. Then Agent Pierce was standing in front of me again. "Dr. Oakes," she said, "there is one remaining matter that requires your decision before we proceed. It cannot wait, and it is not something I can decide for you." She did not elaborate. She simply looked at me with the expression of someone who understands that what comes next is not law enforcement's jurisdiction. "Tell me," I said. Agent Pierce looked at the room, at Gerald, at Vivian, at Detective Stubbs standing near the door, at Dr. Corby in the corner, and then she looked back at me with the expression of someone who has learned to deliver complicated information in simple language. "The warrant we are executing covers the fraudulent guardianship, filing the wire fraud associated with the data transmission attempt, and Preston Caulfield's conspiracy with Nexagen Corporation," she said. "It does not cover the Series 7B archive itself. The research data in that cellar is not legally speaking seized evidence. Not yet." I waited. "The FBI has an interest in the data as corroborating material for the prosecution," she continued. "We would like your voluntary cooperation in transferring custody. But I want to be honest with you, Dr. Oakes, because I think you deserve that." She paused. "If that data enters the federal evidence chain, its ultimate disposition is determined by a judge. Given the partial NIIH funding history, there is a realistic possibility that a court rules it subject to federal licensing, which means it could end up exactly where Preston was trying to put it," I said. "In commercial hands." Pierce did not look away. "That is a possibility I cannot rule out." I turned to Gerald. He was already watching me with the expression he wore when he was about to say something he had been carrying for a long time. "There is something I should have explained this morning," he said. before we left Naperville. But there was not time, and I needed you to hear it in the right sequence. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document, not the one Preston had left on the table, something different, thicker, the edges soft with age. Margaret's power of attorney. Executed in 2006, amended in 2011. He held it out to me. It transfers decision-making authority over all materials, data, and intellectual property associated with the Oaks Initiative to Vivian, upon her becoming fully informed of the data's existence and nature. I looked at the document without taking it. She became fully informed, I said slowly, 3 weeks ago, when Dr. Corby explained it to her. Yes. The kitchen was very quiet. I had spent 24 years carrying the weight of that data, the decisions around it, the concealment of it, the guilt of it, the grief of it, as though it were mine to carry. I had built my understanding of my own life around the assumption that I was the one responsible for what happened next, that the choice of what to do with it was mine to make and mine to live with. Margaret had decided otherwise. 20 years ago, she had decided otherwise. Something moved through me that I could not name cleanly, not relief, not grief, not anger. Something that contained all three and was larger than any of them individually. I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen wall and felt the old timber under my palm, solid and cool, and I breathed. Vivian was looking at me. She had been looking at me since Gerald began speaking. "I'd like a few minutes with my father," she said. Not to me, to the room. Pierce nodded once and moved toward the door. Stubbs followed without being asked. Gerald looked at me for a moment, then followed them out, and Dr. Corby went last, pulling the cabin door mostly closed behind her. The sound of their footsteps moved off the porch and onto the gravel, and then the cabin was quiet. Vivian and I sat down at the pine table across from each other, in the same chairs where Preston had laid his licensing agreement not 3 hours before. The afternoon light was going golden through the shuttered windows, thin strips of it falling across the table's surface, and the dehumidifier hummed faintly from below. She looked at me for a long moment, without speaking. Not the deliberate neutrality she had worn all day, something softer, something that did not need to protect itself. "She did it on purpose," I said, "giving you the authority instead of me." "Yes." Vivian's voice was quiet. "I think she knew you would hold on to it. Because letting go would have felt like admitting it had cost too much." She folded her hands on the table. "She knew me better in some ways. She knew I wouldn't have that problem." I looked at my daughter's hands. They were Margaret's hands, the same shape, the same proportion, the careful way they rested. "The research was real," I said. "It came out rougher than I intended. What we found, what your body does, it is extraordinary, Vivian." The therapeutic application Preston described, stripped of everything he built around it. It could genuinely help people. Millions of people, potentially. I have to say that. I have to say it out loud, at least once. "I know." She looked at me without flinching. "I've read every file in that cellar. I know what it is." "Then you understand what deleting it means." "I understand what keeping it means," she said. "It means spending the rest of my life as a source document. It means every version of that research, no matter how harmfully restricted, carries my name in a federal database that someone will eventually find a way to access." Her voice did not waver. "It means my children, if I have them, inherit that exposure, and their children." I had not thought that far. I should have. I had not. "There is a third option," I said. Gerald described it an irrevocable research trust, non-commercial academic use only, restricted at the source. Vivienne considered it. I watched her consider it genuinely thoroughly, the way she had always considered difficult things even as a child. "Trusts can be challenged," she said finally. "Restrictions can be litigated. In 20 years, in 30, when I am no longer here to defend it." She stopped. "I trust the science, Dad. I don't trust the systems around it." I could not argue with that. I had spent 24 years learning not to trust the systems around it. I am going to delete it, she said. Quietly, without drama, the way Margaret had always said the most important things. I wanted you to know first. I wanted to look at you when I told you. I held her gaze. My eyes were burning again, the same deep, pressing heat as in the cellar this morning, and I did not try to stop it this time. Are you certain? I asked. It was the only question I had left. Vivienne looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, Mom was certain enough to build all of this so I could make this choice freely. That's the only certainty I need. Vivienne pushed her chair back and stood up. She did not announce it or look to me for confirmation. The decision had been made in the conversation, and she was the kind of person who, once a decision was made, moved toward it without ceremony. I recognized that quality. I had spent 30 years married to the woman she learned it from. I followed her to the cellar door. She stopped at the top of the stairs and looked back at me, not asking permission, something else. Making sure I was there. Making sure I would see it. Come down, she said. Gerald appeared in the cabin doorway before we descended. He must have heard the movement through the door, or seen something in our faces when he looked through the window, because he came back in without being called. And Agent Pierce followed a step behind him, and then Detective Stubbs, and finally Dr. Corby, who stopped in the kitchen and did not come further. Gerald looked at Vivienne. Then he reached into his jacket and produced the recorder still active, the small red indicator light steady, and held it up. Before you proceed, he said, I need to put this on the record. He looked at Pierce, who gave a single nod. Vivienne Oakes, acting under the authority granted by the power of attorney instrument, executed by Margaret Oakes on the 14th of March 2006, and amended on the 2nd of September 2011, is exercising her sole authority to permanently delete all materials constituting the Series 7B archive of the Oakes Initiative. This action is taken voluntarily, without duress, and in the absence of any current federal seizure order covering these materials. He lowered the recorder. Agent Pierce, do you confirm the absence of a seizure order? Confirmed, Pierce said. The current warrant does not extend to the underlying research archive. Gerald looked at Vivienne. Proceed. We went down the stairs. The cellar was the same as it had been this morning. The dehumidifier humming the shelving units along the walls, Margaret's handwriting on every label. But something had shifted in the quality of the room's atmosphere, the way a room shifts when it knows it is about to become a different kind of place. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and watched Vivienne cross to the central table. She sat down in front of the laptop, first, not the server, the laptop. She opened it, and the screen came on, and she typed a sequence I did not recognize into a prompt window. 12 characters. She had memorized them. Of course she had. The laptop connects to the primary server unit, she said, for the recorder, for the record, for whoever would one day read the transcript of this moment. Her voice was steady and clear. I am initiating a 7-pass overwrite protocol on the Series 7B primary partition. This will render the data unrecoverable by any currently available forensic method. She pressed the key. A progress bar appeared on the screen. I watched it. It was not fast. The archive was large, 2.3 terabytes of raw data, 24 years of tissue samples and protein sequences, and epigenetic maps. The record of something that had happened once in 600 million people and been caught, documented, understood. The progress bar moved across the screen in small, unhurried increments, and the server unit hummed slightly louder than the dehumidifier, and the cellar was otherwise completely quiet. I thought about the winter of 2000, when I had first looked at the data and not believed what I was seeing. I thought about calling Elaine Corby into my office and watching her face when she looked at the same numbers. I thought about driving home that evening, telling Margaret over dinner that something extraordinary had happened, watching her put her fork down and look at me with those careful, patient eyes, and say quietly, "Tell me everything." My throat tightened until it ached. The progress bar reached 40%. 50. The server unit's hum was steady and constant, indifferent to what it was doing. Vivienne sat with her hands in her lap, watching the screen. Her back was straight. Her breathing was even. But her right hand resting on her thigh was pressed flat, with a pressure that was not quite calm. And I recognized that too, the way the body keeps score even when the mind has decided. 70%, 80. From behind me on the stairs, I heard a sound. I turned. Dr. Elaine Corby was standing on the third step, her hand on the railing, watching the progress bar from a distance. Her face was doing something that I did not have a name for, not grief exactly, not relief, not guilt, but the specific expression of someone who has watched something they built with great care and worse judgment come to its necessary end. Her eyes were wet, but she did not look away. I did not look away either. 94%, 97. The progress bar completed. The screen displayed a single line of text, white on dark. Permanent deletion complete. Primary partition empty. No recovery possible. Vivienne looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then she closed the laptop. She turned around on the chair and looked up at me. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was steady. But something in her face, in the space around her eyes, in the set of her mouth, had changed. Not broken. Settled. Like something that had been held at tension for a very long time had finally been allowed to rest at its natural position. I stepped forward and put my hand on top of her head, the way I had not done since she was a child, and she leaned into it exactly the way she had then. We came back upstairs into a cabin that smelled of cedar and October and the particular stillness of rooms where important things have just been concluded. Agent Pierce was standing by the window. She turned when we came through the cellar door. "The prosecution proceeds," she said. "The transmitted recording, the USB evidence, and Dr. Corby's 2-year cooperation file are more than sufficient. You are not required for the trial, Dr. Oakes. Either of you." I nodded. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "There is something you should know. Preston Caulfield is not the top of this. Nexagen's operation extends considerably further than one man and one intermediary. There are others involved, some of them in positions you would find surprising." She paused. "We have been building that case for 2 years. It is not finished." The October dark was pressing against the cabin windows now, and the ceiling light cast a warm enclosed circle over the kitchen table, where this morning's catastrophe had slowly, methodically become something else entirely. The cold hit me first. I had been inside since we arrived, inside the car, inside the cabin, inside the cellar, and stepping through the front door into the October night was like walking into a different version of the day entirely. The air smelled of dead leaves and damp earth, and the faint chemical trace of vehicle exhaust. And above the tree line, the sky was a deep, clear dark with the first stars beginning to show at the edges. The agents had set up portable lights on the gravel track, and the scene in front of the cabin looked nothing like the quiet forest property I had arrived at 8 hours ago. 3 federal vehicles, 1 state police unit, agents moving with the purposeful efficiency of people working through a procedure. Off to the east, where the gravel track met the county road, a 4th vehicle had stopped, a white van with a satellite dish on the roof. Its side door open, a camera on a tripod pointed toward the property. Blake Fontaine stood beside it in a gray coat, a handheld microphone at his side, watching. I recognized him from this morning's broadcast on Nora Finch's phone. He was younger in person than he looked on screen, 32 perhaps, with the particular alert stillness of someone who has trained themselves to observe without visibly reacting. Vivienne came to stand beside me on the porch steps. We did not speak. I watched the scene and she watched the scene, and the night pressed in around the portable lights from all sides. Preston came out of the cabin's side door flanked by 2 agents. His hands were cuffed in front of him, not behind a small procedural consideration that I suspected was Gerald's negotiation. and he walked between the agents with his head level and his face composed in the way I had watched him compose it all afternoon. One of the agents spoke quietly near his left ear. The Miranda advisement. I could not hear the words from where I stood, but I knew them the same words every arrested person in this country hears at the moment the law formally claims them, the words that mark the line between before and after. Preston looked straight ahead. He did not look at the cabin. He did not look at the camera lights which had found him the moment he appeared, and now followed him steadily across the gravel. He did not look at Vivian. She watched him walk to the federal vehicle. Her arms were at her sides, her coat collar turned up against the cold, and her face was doing something I had not expected and did not know how to name. It was not relief. It was not satisfaction. It was not even anger, though she had every right to every one of those things. It was the expression of someone watching the end of something that was never what it appeared to be. A grief that belongs to a specific category, the category of mourning, not what was lost, but what was never real to begin with. I stood beside her and did not say a word. Some things do not need words and cannot be helped by them. The federal vehicle's door closed. Fontaine raised his microphone and began speaking into his camera, his face turned toward the scene, his voice too low to carry to the porch. Tomorrow morning his report would correct this morning's report. The Chicago resident named as a person of interest would become the Chicago scientist whose research was the target of a federal fraud conspiracy. The narrative would reverse itself in the space of one news cycle, as narratives do without particular acknowledgement of what the first version cost. I watched Fontaine work and felt something dry and complicated that was not quite bitterness and not quite understanding, but contained elements of both. Gerald came around the side of the cabin from where he had been speaking with Detective Stubbs near the state police unit. He climbed the porch steps and stood on my other side. "Cook County Clerk has been notified," he said quietly. "The guardianship petition is formally suspended pending review. It will not survive review." He paused. "Fletcher Vane's arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning in federal court. The wire fraud charges carry up to 20 years. I nodded. "And Stubbs?" I asked. "He'll write his report to reflect interagency cooperation." Something moved at the corner of Gerald's mouth, not quite a smile, the shadow of one. "His name will be on the right side of this." Agent Pierce walked past the porch with two of her agents speaking in a low, rapid voice into her phone, her attention already moving forward into the next phase of what was clearly a much larger operation than anything that had happened in this cabin today. She gave me a single nod as she passed. Professional, clean, the nod of someone who has delivered what she came to deliver and is already working on what comes next. Vivienne turned and went back inside without a word. I waited another moment watching the federal vehicle's taillights disappear down the gravel track, watching Fontaine's camera follow them until the trees closed in. And then I followed her. The cabin was warm and quiet. The kitchen light was still on, that enclosed circle of yellow warmth over the pine table. The cellar door was closed. Gerald's recorder sat where he had left it, its red light finally dark, the transmission complete, the record made. I pulled out the nearest chair to sit down, and that was when I saw it. It was on the table, partially beneath the edge of the pine surface, where the licensing agreement had been, as though it had been there all along, and the afternoon's activity had simply obscured it. A small, cream-colored envelope, the kind used for personal correspondence, its flap sealed with the same dark wax I had seen on Gerald's envelope this morning. My name was not on it, neither was Gerald's. The front of the envelope read in Margaret's unmistakable, careful handwriting, two names side by side with an ampersand between them, Vivian and Raymond. I picked it up. It was light in my hand, one page, perhaps two. I stood at the kitchen table in the October quiet, and held it, and did not move. Vivienne came back into the kitchen and stopped. She looked at the envelope in my hands, and I watched the recognition move across her face, not surprise. Something slower and more internal, like a sound heard from a great distance that gradually resolves into something you know. That's her handwriting, she said. Yes. She crossed the kitchen and sat down beside me, not across the table, but next to me, her shoulder close to mine, and I held the envelope between us so we could both see the front of it. Her name and mine side by side in Margaret's careful script. She imagined this, Vivian said quietly. She imagined us sitting here together. She imagined everything else, I said. I don't know why this should surprise me. Vivienne almost smiled. Then she held out her hand, and I understood she should open it. The authority was hers, and we both knew it, and I placed the envelope in her palm without hesitation. She broke the wax seal cleanly and unfolded 2 pages of cream notepaper covered on both sides in Margaret's small, precise handwriting, and held them between us at an angle where we could both read. Margaret had dated it the 15th of August, 2022, 2 years before she died. 3 years almost before this day. She began with our names, not formally just Raymond, Vivian, as though she were speaking into a room she expected to find us both in. If you are reading this together, then something I feared has come to pass, and something I hoped for has also come to pass. You found each other in the middle of it. That is enough. My chest tightened so sharply, I pressed my hand flat against the table. She went on. 3 paragraphs about what she knew of Nexogen by August 2022, not guesswork, not intuition, but documented intelligence she had assembled over years with Gerald's help, and latterly through Dr. Corby's cooperation. She named the structure 3 senior executives at Nexogen's Boston headquarters who had approved the Series 7B acquisition strategy, 2 members of a federal biomedical research grant committee, both with prior professional connections to Nexogen's parent holding company, and 1 name that Margaret set apart in its own sentence, preceded by a dash and followed by nothing, just the name hanging on the page, the way important things sometimes do. I read it. Then I read it again. Raymond. Vivian's voice had dropped. I see it, I said. From the next room, the small sitting room where Agent Pierce had set up a temporary working space, came the sound of a conversation being conducted in the low, rapid register of professional urgency. Dr. Corby's voice even and precise. Pierce's voice responses clipped. And then once a silence that was not empty but full, the kind of silence that falls when someone says a name that changes the dimensions of a room. A moment later, Pierce appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the letter in our hands, then at my face, and something shifted in her expression, a confirmation of something she had already been told. She knew, Pierce said. It was not a question. She knew for 2 years, I said, at minimum. Pierce looked at the letter for a moment longer, then said, Dr. Corby's debrief confirms the same name, among others. She paused. This is going to take considerably longer than Preston Caulfield's prosecution. I want you to understand that. What we are building is a case that will move slowly and carefully through institutions that do not yield quickly. She looked at me steadily. But it will move. Gerald came in from the porch where he had been making calls, and Pierce turned to brief him quietly in the kitchen doorway. I watched Gerald listen, his face doing the controlled processing thing it did when information was being organized, and then Pierce said something that made him go very still. Nora, he said. Not a question, a recognition. Your wife called Detective Stubbs' direct line 6 weeks ago from a prepaid phone, Pierce said. She identified herself only as a person with knowledge of the Nexogen inquiry. She gave him 2 names and a document reference. A pause. She did not tell you. Gerald said nothing for a moment. His jaw worked slightly. Then he looked at the ceiling briefly, the way a person looks when they are managing something that has moved them and they have not yet decided what to do with it. No, he said. She did not tell me. He took out his phone and stepped back onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. Through the wood, I could hear his voice low and unsteady, in a way I had never heard from Gerald Finch in 30 years, saying his wife's name. Vivienne was looking at the second page of Margaret's letter. I looked with her. The final paragraph was shorter than the others. Margaret had written it in a slightly different hand, not uncertain, but deliberate, as though she had chosen each word from a larger set and discarded what did not belong. I did not tell either of you everything, because I did not want either of you to carry what I was carrying. That was perhaps not the right decision. But it was the decision I made, and I made it because I loved you both more than I loved being transparent. I hope you can forgive the distinction. I think you already have. Take care of each other. That is the only instruction that matters now. Vivienne set the letter down on the table. She pressed her fingers lightly over her eyes for a moment, not crying something. Just before crying, the physical act of holding something in long enough to let it settle. And then she lowered her hands and looked at the kitchen wall. She really was something else, Vivienne said softly. She really was, I said. Outside, the forest was completely dark and completely quiet, the way southern Illinois gets in October, when the wind dies, and the animals have gone still, and the only sound is the particular silence of a place that has held something important and is now resting. The kitchen light was warm. The letter was on the table between us. Gerald came back in from the porch. His eyes were bright, and he did not explain why, and neither of us asked. Vivienne looked at the table for a long moment. Then she said, I don't want to drive back tonight. I woke before 5. The cabin was dark and very still, the kind of stillness that exists only in the deep country, where there is no ambient light and no ambient sound. And the dark has a texture to it that city dark never achieves. I lay on the narrow bed in the cabin's back room, a room I had not been in since the late 1990s, when Margaret and I had brought Vivienne here as a child, and she had run through the Oaks all afternoon and fallen asleep at the dinner table. And I listened to the silence for a long time before I got up. My back ached from the drive and the hours of standing and the particular exhaustion of a day that had required too many different kinds of attention. I moved carefully through the dark cabin to the kitchen, found the old percolator on the counter, where it had always been, and filled it from the tap. The water ran cold and clear. Someone's maintenance arrangement. Nora's, probably through Gerald, had kept the pipes functional. I sat down at the kitchen table while the coffee percolated and looked at the letter. It was still there, where Vivienne had set it down the night before. 2 pages of cream notepaper in the thin pre-dawn dark, Margaret's handwriting, invisible at this distance in this light, but present the way certain things are present, even when you cannot see them directly, the way you know a coastline is there before you see it, from the way the light changes over the water. I turned on the small lamp above the stove. The kitchen came up warm and low. I did not read the letter again. I had read it twice the night before, and I knew it well enough that reading it a third time would have been something other than reading a kind of conversation with a person who could no longer answer. I just let it be on the table in front of me, and I let the coffee finish, and I listened to the forest outside the window, beginning its slow, creaking adjustment to the approach of dawn. I had been sitting for perhaps 20 minutes when I heard Vivienne's footsteps on the back room floor. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with a wool blanket from the back room wrapped around her shoulders and her hair loose, and she looked in the lamplight startlingly young. Not as young as she had been in that hospital bed at 10 years old, but younger than the woman who had sat across from Preston Caulfield yesterday afternoon with her arms at her sides and her face like a closed door. She looked like someone who had put down something very heavy and had not yet entirely adjusted to the absence of its weight. She looked at the coffee, then at me, then at the coffee again. "Please," she said. I got up and poured her a cup, and she sat down across from me, and we held our cups, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the first gray-blue trace of light was beginning at the top of the tree line. "How are you?" I asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she had always considered questions, even simple ones. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I need a few days to find out." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "How are you?" "The same," I said. "Exactly the same." She nodded as though that were the right answer. Perhaps it was. We sat in that for a while. The percolator ticked as it cooled. Outside, a bird started one single call, tentative, testing the dark, and then stopped. "I keep thinking about the research," I said. It was the thing I had not said the night before, the thing I had held back, because the night before had already carried enough. Not with regret. I want to be clear about that. You made the right decision, and I believe that without reservation. I looked at my coffee cup. I just keep thinking about the winter of 2000, what it felt like to look at those numbers for the first time. There was a moment when I understood what I was looking at, really understood it, and I remember thinking that this was the reason for all of it. The work, the years, I stopped, started again. I thought Margaret would be proud. Vivian looked at me across the table. Her eyes were very steady. "She was," she said. "She told me. When I was in college, before she gave me the letter, when we were just talking, the way we used to talk when you weren't home. She said your work was the most extraordinary thing she had ever watched up close." She paused. She also said it scared her. Not the science. What people would do with it. I looked at my daughter. "She was right about that too," I said. "She was right about most things." Vivian's mouth moved into something that was finally a smile, small and honest, and without the weight of the day behind it. "It's a little exhausting, honestly." I laughed. It came out of me the way laughter comes when you have not laughed in a long time, and your body has forgotten how to do it quietly, too loud, for the small kitchen slightly surprised at itself. Vivian laughed with me, and for a moment the cabin held the sound of it, and then let it go, and the kitchen settled back into its warm quiet. Gerald appeared in the doorway in his coat, already dressed, his phone in his hand. His face was different from the face he had worn all day yesterday. Something in it had been restored or perhaps returned to a position it had been displaced from for a long time. He looked at the two of us at the table and did not say anything, but the look on his face was the look of a man who has seen something he was not sure he would get to see. "Nora sends her love," he said. "To both of you." I nodded. Vivian raised her coffee cup slightly in acknowledgement. Gerald put his phone in his pocket and moved to the window and looked out at the tree line where the gray-blue of pre-dawn was sharpening now at the edges, the sky beginning to differentiate from the land. The oaks held their last October color against the coming light, copper and amber, and a deep saturated gold that would not last another week. I stood up from the table and went to stand beside him. We did not need to speak about what had happened. It was all in the record on Gerald's encrypted server in Pierce's files in the Cook County court system, in the federal prosecutor's office that would spend the next several months building the case that Margaret had spent years making possible. It would move slowly. It would be complicated. Some of what she had documented in her letter would come to light, and some of it would be absorbed into the long, imperfect machinery of institutional accountability and emerge changed. That was the nature of these things. She had known that too, but it would move. Pierce had said so, and I believed her. I thought about my wife not as she was in the video, not as she was in the letters, but as she was on an ordinary evening, any evening, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, looking slightly left, while she ordered her thoughts, about to say something precise and true. I held that image for a moment, and then I let it rest, the way you learn to let things rest, when you have carried them for long enough to understand the difference between holding on and honoring. Outside, the first true light came up over the Shawnee tree line. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the slow and certain brightening of a sky that had made this decision long before any of us were awake to see it. The oaks stood gold and still in it, I watched until I could see the individual leaves. I spent 60 years believing that if I worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, I could protect the people I loved by carrying everything alone. I was wrong. My wife saw what I could not see. My daughter acted where I hesitated. And somewhere in the quiet of that Shawnee morning, I finally understood what I should have understood decades earlier. God does not give us the people we love so we can shield them from life. He gives them to us so we can face life together. These grandpa stories are not easy ones, but they are honest. If there is any advice I can offer from my own family story, it is simply this: do not be like me. Do not wait until the crisis arrives to tell the people beside you what they mean to you. Do not carry the weight alone and call it protection. Trust is not weakness. Silence is not strength. That is my personal belief, and 60 years of living have only made me more certain of it. If this grandpa story's entry stayed with you, if something in this family story reminded you of someone you love, leave a comment below and tell me. Every story shared here grows because of you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe so we never lose each other in the noise. Thank you sincerely for staying with this family story all the way to the end. It means more than you know. A gentle note: the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted entirely for reflection and understanding. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds your soul.